Hi guys, Paul here, and today we are going to start a new series. As some of you might have seen in the past, we've covered collecting different primitive tinders, such as birch bark and fatwood and cattails. In those videos we went over collecting and identifying those materials as well as harvesting them and talking about how they would work for fire starting. But in this series we're actually going to put them to the test and use them for starting fires. Today we're going to have a look at fatwood, and if you haven't seen my video on collecting and identifying and kind of talking about what fatwood is, I'd suggest you go back and check that out. It will just help you make a wee bit more sense of what fatwood is and why it works the way it does. I'll put a link in the description for that video. Feel free to go back and check it out. But let's get started. Okay everyone, so before we get stuck into using fatwood, I figured I'd give you a quick rundown on what it is. This is a piece of fatwood here, and essentially what it is a bit of pine, Scots pine, that's been saturated in resin. And pine resin is extremely flammable, and the reason it gets like this is because when a pine tree dies, all the resin settles in particular bits of the tree, primarily in the roots and in the shoulders, and the wood there gets filled with this resin, goes incredibly hard, and the resin, when we make shavings, means that it will take a spark, no problem, burn nice and hot and long for us to be able to use for starting a fire. So that's essentially what fatwood is. Again, I'll link it for those that want to go and watch the video on collecting this stuff. It's my go-to tinder, hasn't let me down yet, and you'll see why in just a minute. Okay, so the way we're going to start this fire is using a ferro rod. This is my ferro rod here, and what a ferro rod is essentially just a rod of metal that when you scrape it produces sparks. And I use a bit of flint for producing the sparks off my ferro rod, mainly because I lost my striker, but also because it does work very well. Just a sharp edge like this one here. And the way a ferro rod works is essentially you take a sharp edge like this and scrape down it, and that will produce sparks. And those sparks come off incredibly hot, and if there's anything around that is nice and fine and combustible, 9 times out of 10 it'll go up in flames. So this is what we're going to be using today, and there is different ways you could use fatwood. You can use it in getting the fire from a bow drill started, for example, but ferro rods are one of the most common ways that people out in the woods tend to start fires. Totally waterproof, it's not going to break anything on you, and it lasts an incredibly long time. So that's what we'll be using today, along with a piece of flint. Okay everyone, so before we get started in prepping our tinder, it's good to make sure you have all the materials you're going to need around you so that you're not rushing about, panicking, looking for stuff to burn. And the way we're going to start off is just by collecting these smaller sticks here. These are all nice and dry, and when you break them they make a crackly sound, and they're about the thickness of a pencil lead. And basically just want to collect a big bundle of these. The more you have, the better your chances of success. So I'm going to do that just now, and then I'll come back to you. Okay everyone, so we've collected our initial sticks here, and like I said, this is all about the size of a pencil lead, and I like to do my fires in 3 stages. So this would be the first stage, nice and dry and really fine. The next stage would be about the size of your thumb, and then up from that about your wrist. But because I'm just doing this for sort of demonstration purposes to show you guys, I am just going to do the first stage, but once you get your first stage going, you'd put your second stage on, and then followed by your third. But this is just to prove that you can use fatwood efficiently to get a fire going, so I'm not going to bother with that today. So now we've got this, let's get stuck into processing our fatwood. Okay everyone, so as you can see we have our fat wood here, and it doesn't always look like this. When you first collect fat wood, 9 times out of 10 it looks like this, and the way I like to do it is just to split it down the middle with a knife, and what that does is give you this and produces a nice flat surface for you to use for shavings. And it's shavings that we scrape off this, that's what we're going to use for starting our fire. And the way we do that is first make sure we've got a nice flat bit of wood. You don't want any bumps or ridges, because that could cause your knife to come off and maybe cut your fingers, or you know, it's just generally safer to have it nice and smooth and controlled. And the way we do this is just to sit the fat wood on a hard surface. That way it's not digging into the ground, you're not going to lose grip of it. And what you want to do is just grab it from the side. And an important thing to remember is to make sure none of your fingers come past this surface of flat wood here, because the way we produce the shavings is to take our knife, put it at a 90-degree angle with the wood, and we go up and down, and that produces the shavings. But if your finger's in the way and you come down, then there's a good chance you're going to cut your finger and just generally injure yourself. So try and keep all your fingers out the way, nice and controlled. And what we do, our knife at 90 degrees, nice sharp knife, and just go up and down, nice and controlled. There's no need to rush. And as you can see, that starts producing shavings. So as you can see, we're producing shavings here, 90 degrees, and you just want to keep doing that until you've got a nice pile. So I'll do that just now. So here we have our pile of shavings. As you can see, we've got quite a lot there, and this would actually be probably overkill. We don't really need that much, but again, it's always better to have more than you need. And the way we're going to light this, as we mentioned earlier, is with our ferro rod and our bit of flint here. And the way I like to light my fires using a ferro rod is to use my ferro rod to hold tinders in place. So whether it be fatwood or birch bark or dried grass or whatever, hold the tinder in place with your ferro rod, and that requires you have a hard surface underneath. And then using the sharp bit of my flint here, I would then strike down to produce the sparks, and then that will light the shavings here. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of that without the shavings. Put them somewhere safe just now. So you want to put your ferro rod down somewhere just nice and hard, using the sharp edge, whether it be your flint. Most ferro rods come with a scraper you can use, or the back of your knife if it's, you know, a 90-degree angle knife. But for me, I'm going to use this flint. So push down nice and hard, your tinder would be around here, and you use your scraper, and what that does is let you scrape sparks into a sort of really small area, so you can strike stuff with much more precision. And that's the way I like to start my fires. So we'll take some of our fatwood shavings here, we won't use all of them, just some of them, and give it a go. Okay everyone, so here we are by the fire pit. As you can see, we have some nice flat ground here, and as we discussed earlier, when we go to light our shavings, we want a nice hard surface underneath us, and as you can see, this is just sand here. So what I like to do is get a nice flat rock and just put that down in the middle, and what that does then is give us a place where we can push down without digging our ferro rods into the sand. And the problem with that is you'll push your tinder into the sand and it'll become damp and then harder to light. So I've got our shavings here. I'm just going to put these on the rock in the middle. And I also have our smaller sticks we collected here earlier on. And the way I like to do it is when this takes, is get my smaller sticks, and I don't like to place them on, I like to hold them above. That way when they catch I can place them down and then start putting my bigger stuff on top of that. The problem with just putting it straight down is you have the potential to smother the flame, and then you have to start from scratch again. So I like to just hold it above, and then once I see it taking, I'll lay it down and then get my bigger stuff on top of that. But anyway, let's get this going and see how it performs. As you can see, it took no problem there. And we just want to get our smaller sticks, as we discussed, just hold them above the flames, not on top. And as you can see, they're starting to take now. And then once you've gotten to that stage, you would then start putting your bigger stuff on, so your thumb size pieces would then go on, and then your wrist size pieces once they start to take. But as you can see, it worked pretty well. Took a few strikes with the ferro rod, but got there. And puts out a really nice heat and gets stuff going really quickly. So as you can see, the fatwood does a really good job. Doesn't take too much processing, and a few strikes from the ferro rod and it was lit. So let's go back over to my chair. So there we have it, everyone. That was us starting a fire using fatwood. I hope you found that useful, and if there's anything that was unclear, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you, no problem. And this is just the first video in this series, so next we'll cover birch bark, and then we'll move on to cattails, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But anyway, that's going to do it for today. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all again soon.